It began with a whisper behind a closed door, the kind of sound that should have meant nothing, yet changed everything. Julia Henderson woke to her husband's voice, low and deliberate, speaking words not meant for her. She still doesn't suspect anything. In that fragile moment between sleep and truth, her world cracked open. What followed was not just betrayal, but revelation. A woman's journey from silence to strength, from being deceived to reclaiming every piece of the life she thought she had lost. It was close to midnight when Julia Henderson opened her eyes to the sound of a voice. Low, deliberate, and not meant for her to hear. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. The apartment was still wrapped in the quiet hum of Boston's winter night. The clock on her bedside table glowed 12:17 a.m. David's side of the bed was empty, his warmth fading from the sheets. Then she heard it again. A man's voice. His voice. She still doesn't suspect anything. Julia froze. The sound came from down the hall, from his office. Her breath caught. The air thickened. Her hand trembled as she reached for the blanket, pulling it close like a shield. There was a pause, the click of a pen, the creak of his leather chair. Then David spoke again, lower this time, almost mechanical. Everything's going as planned. By Friday, it'll be done. The words pierced through the silence. Julia pushed herself upright, the wooden floor cold beneath her feet. She moved without thinking, one cautious step after another, until she reached the half-closed office door. A thin blade of light cut across the hallway, slicing through the darkness. Inside, David sat at his desk, his head bent toward the phone, his tone steady and calm, the same tone he used when managing clients, soothing, persuasive. But tonight it sounded different, calculated. She won't see it coming, he said. Julia's pulse thudded in her ears. The world narrowed to the faint glow spilling under that door and the sound of his voice, a voice that used to be her comfort. Her mind raced through questions she couldn't form. Was it about work? About her? About someone else? Her fingers brushed the doorknob, then stopped. Something inside her whispered, "Don't move." She took a slow step back, careful not to make a sound. Her throat burned with unspoken words. When she finally reached the bedroom, she slipped under the covers and lay perfectly still. Minutes later, David returned. The mattress dipped as he climbed in beside her, the familiar scent of cedar and coffee following him. He sighed softly, as if nothing in the world was wrong. His hand brushed her shoulder, gentle, rehearsed. "Couldn't sleep," he murmured. "Go back to bed." Julia didn't move. She stared at the ceiling, every muscle locked. When his breathing slowed, she turned her head toward him, just enough to see his face in the dim light, peaceful, serene, as if he hadn't just whispered betrayal into the dark. She lay awake until dawn morning, arrived with the quiet hum of routine, the smell of toasted bread, the faint whistle of the kettle. Julia moved through it all like a ghost playing the part of herself. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice even. David smiled from across the kitchen island. "Always." He kissed her forehead, his lips warm, his eyes unreadable. The gesture felt scripted. When he left for work, Julia stood alone by the window, watching his car disappear down the snowy street. She pressed her palms against the cool glass, trying to steady the storm inside her. For years, their lives had followed a perfect rhythm. Mornings began with shared laughter over burnt toast. Evenings ended with quiet conversations and candlelight. He had been her anchor, or so she thought. I believed trust was love. Her voice whispered in her mind, soft as confession. She turned away from the window and reached for her phone. It started with hesitation, a thumb hovering over the banking app she had never opened before. David always handled their finances. He said it made life easier. She had believed him. The screen flickered to life. Rows of numbers appeared. Small withdrawals. Repeating patterns, $500, $800, $2,200. Not large enough to draw suspicion, but consistent. A quiet leak. Little numbers, she thought, bleeding slowly. Her stomach tightened. The sound of the door startled her. David stepped inside, still in his coat, holding 2 cups of coffee. Checking the account this early, his tone was casual, but the brief flash of surprise in his eyes betrayed him. "I was just curious," Julia said, forcing a smile. "Some of these charges look unfamiliar." David walked over, took a slow sip from his cup, and placed it on the counter. "Oh, those? Just a few side investments. I must have forgotten to mention them." His voice was smooth, almost charming, the same voice that once made her feel safe. He leaned in, brushed her shoulder lightly, and smiled. "You worry too much." Then he turned away, humming to himself as if the conversation were nothing. Julia watched him pour sugar into his coffee, the spoon clinking against the mug. Every sound felt amplified, sharp. She nodded, pretending to believe him. But something inside her had shifted. A quiet, invisible crack. He finished his drink, kissed her cheek, and left for work with his usual confidence. The door closed softly behind him. Julia stood still, staring at the untouched cup of coffee he had made for her. The steam curled upward, fading into the air. That night, as the city settled into silence once more, Julia lay awake again. The room was dark except for the faint blue glow from David's phone on the nightstand. She turned her head toward it. The screen lit up. A single message appeared. "Transfer before Friday. She can't know yet." Her heart stopped. For a long moment she simply stared. At the words. At the man sleeping beside her. At the illusion of safety dissolving before her eyes. She did not cry. She did not speak. She only whispered to herself, so quietly that even the night could not hear. "I see it now." And the silence that followed was no longer peaceful. It was the sound of trust breaking, softly, completely. Julia lay in the dark and watched the pale blue light pulsing from David's phone. She could hear his breathing beside her, slow and steady, full of the kind of sleep she had not tasted in days. A message still glowed on the lock screen. "Transfer before Friday. She cannot know yet." Her pulse beat in her throat. The words did not feel like words. They felt like a hand closing around her. Her gaze moved from the phone to David's face. So calm, so gentle in sleep. A man who, every morning, kissed her forehead and poured her coffee. A man who had said more than once, "I will take care of you. You never have to worry." Now she understood why he wanted her not to worry. Slowly, carefully, she slid out of bed. She did not turn on the light. She did not reach for a robe. She just moved barefoot through the hallway she knew by memory, past the framed photographs of book tours and anniversaries and holidays, all the proof that their life together had once been something she had believed in. The bathroom door clicked shut behind her. The lock turned. Only then did she let herself breathe. Her hands were shaking so violently she had to grip the marble counter to steady them. She could feel her own heartbeat in her palms. She lifted her face to the mirror and did not recognize the woman looking back. Her skin was pale. Her eyes were wide and wet. Her mouth was tight with something deeper than fear. Not fear. Humiliation. How long had I been sleeping beside a stranger? The thought did not come like narration. It came like a wound being named. Her knees gave out. She slid down the wall and sat on the cold tile floor, arms wrapped tight around herself. Her body shook in quiet waves. The sobs did not explode. They broke silently, like glass under a shoe. There was no anger yet. Not even rage. Only a clean, sharp grief for something that was not dead yesterday, but was dead now. I loved him, she thought. I loved him, and he prepared for Friday. Her breathing came too fast. She pressed her palm to her chest like someone trying to keep a door from being forced open. She stayed there a long time, in that small room, in that first private collapse. Then something in her shifted. It was small. It was quiet. It was not dramatic, but it was final. No, she thought. No, this is not how I disappear. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She inhaled and exhaled, letting the air steady her ribs. When she finally stood, her legs still trembled, but there was something different in her eyes. Resolve. She unlocked the bathroom door. She walked back down the hallway, Not to the bedroom, not to him, but to his office. The office door opened with the softest sigh. She stepped inside and closed it behind her. The room smelled like him. Cedar, ink, and the faint trace of his cologne. The desk lamp was still on from earlier that night. His phone charger sat coiled beside his planner. His laptop slept with its lid half closed, as if it had only paused, not stopped. And there, on the corner of the desk, was his phone. He had left it downstairs that evening. He never left it anywhere. Tonight he had. He trusts me, she thought, and she almost laughed. Her hand hovered over the phone before she touched it. Her thumb pressed. The screen lit up. It was not locked. For one heartbeat, she could not move. Then she opened his messages. There were work threads, logistics, names she did not know, numbers she did not recognize. She scrolled, and then she saw it. The thread had no contact name. Only a number. Send her the Ilium files. Just make sure she stays in the dark. Almost done. Julia stared at the words until her throat closed. Her. She. Stays in the dark. Me. Her vision blurred, then cleared. She scrolled higher. Above that message was another one. Older. Friday, 8 o'clock. She will sign before she understands what it is. Her stomach turned to ice. She set the phone down exactly where it had been. She did not slam it. She did not gasp. She did not shatter. She forced every motion to be exact, controlled, disciplined. If she broke now, she knew she would break where he could hear. She stepped back from the desk, and in that quiet, in that private orbit of the office, she understood something with terrifying clarity. He was not leaving her. He was harvesting her. She walked out of the office and closed the door behind her. The apartment felt colder now. She went to the kitchen, turned on the tap, and splashed water on her face. The shock of it brought her breathing back under control. Her reflection in the dark kitchen window looked calmer than she felt. When the sun rose, she was still awake. By 8 in the morning, David had kissed her cheek and left for work. By 8:15, she had her phone in her hand and Elena Grant on the line. Elena answered on the second ring. "Julia?" "It is not nothing," Julia whispered. She swallowed. "I think David is planning something. I think it is about money. I think it is about me." There was no small talk. Elena did not soothe her with empty comfort. Elena listened, and Julia told her. She told her about the midnight call. She told her about the transfers. She told her about Friday. She told her about the Ilium files. When she finished, there was a long silence on the other end. Then Elena's voice came back, low and precise. "Julia," she said, "you need to move fast. You need to protect what is yours." "I never wanted to touch any of it," Julia said. "He always handled the accounts. The properties, the contracts. He said I should not worry." "I know," Elena said quietly. That was the point. For a moment, Julia could not speak. Then she said, "What do I do?" "I am coming to you," Elena said. "Do not tell him anything. Do not confront him. Do not warn him. Today we move everything tied to you into protection. Today we make sure he cannot take what you built." Julia closed her eyes. "Elena," she whispered, "this is our home. This is my work. This is my life. And it is still yours," Elena said. "But only if we move now." The call ended. Julia stood in the kitchen with the quiet of the apartment pressing in around her. For a moment, she let her hand rest flat on the counter so she could feel something solid. Then she began. What followed did not feel like power. It felt like surgery. Signatures, phone calls, authorizations, transfers. Her name on documents she had never seen spelled out in this way. Her own handwriting shaking as she signed a deed that moved the title of their Beacon Hill brownstone into a protected trust under her name alone. Accounts separated, royalties isolated, shares redirected. She had always told herself the money was the family fund, almost $500 million in assets across real estate, intellectual property from her books, and long-term holdings. She had believed it was something they held together. She had believed that was romantic. Now she saw the truth. It was the knife he planned to use. Her hand trembled over one final page. She blinked hard to steady it. A tear fell and hit the paper. She wiped it away before it could smear the ink. I am not moving money, she thought. I am moving survival. Hours passed like minutes. By the time the winter sky outside their windows had turned a soft steel gray, the first wall was up. Not a perfect wall, not an impenetrable wall, but a wall. A beginning. When David came home that evening, he walked through the door carrying takeout, his smile warm, his voice easy. Thought we would have Thai tonight, he said, lifting the bag. You look tired this morning. I wanted to make it easier for you. Her body obeyed the old script. She smiled. She reached for the bag. She let their fingers brush. Thank you, she said softly. He leaned in and kissed her temple. You know I take care of you. Her chest tightened. Yes, she thought. You tried. They ate at the dining table by the window. He talked about his day. He asked about hers. She answered gently, the way she always had. Her voice was calm. Her posture relaxed. Inside, she had already stepped away from him, like a shoreline pulling back before a wave. After dinner, he set his phone face down on the table while he cleared the plates. A message appeared for only a moment, just long enough for her to read it. Friday, 8 p.m. She will sign before she realizes it. Julia watched the screen. Her face did not move. Her heartbeat did. Not this time, she thought. Let him think I am still asleep. Friday arrived with a silence that felt deliberate. The sky outside the windows was the color of slate, heavy with the threat of snow. Julia set 2 cups of coffee on the dining table. She could hear David's footsteps before she saw him. Steady, unhurried, as if he had rehearsed this moment. He entered the room in one of his tailored suits, the same navy one he wore to every major client meeting. His tie was perfectly knotted. His expression was calm, almost gentle. He carried a folder in one hand. We need to talk, he said. Julia looked up, her fingers circling the rim of her cup. About what? He placed the folder on the table and slid it toward her. About us. The moment stretched, long enough for her to hear the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock, the faint tremor of her own breath. When she opened the folder, the words at the top were clear, black and final. Petition for divorce. I think it is for the best, he said softly, as though reading from a script. We have grown apart. There is no reason to make this painful. Julia looked at him, her expression unreadable. You are right, she said. Her voice was calm, too calm. It would be painful if I had not already moved everything. The words hung in the air like the echo of a gunshot. David blinked, confusion flickering across his face. What? The accounts, Julia said quietly. The property, the royalties, the investments. Everything that carries my name is no longer within your reach. The color drained from his face. For a fraction of a second, the mask cracked. Then slowly he laughed, a soft, disbelieving sound. You think I wanted this? He said, stepping closer. His tone sharpened, turning from disbelief to accusation. You think I am the villain here? I was saving us. You spent without even knowing what it cost me. I was trying to protect you from yourself. Julia's voice trembled, but not with fear. You spent trust like it was free, she whispered, and now it is gone. His hand twitched, as though he might reach for her, then fell back to his side. His eyes were no longer calm. They were burning. You will regret this, he said. You have no idea what you have started. He turned, grabbed his coat, and left. The sound of the door closing was sharp, final, and cold. Julia sat for a long moment, staring at the papers he had left on the table. Then, slowly, she gathered them, folded them neatly, and placed them in a drawer. Her hands did not shake this time. 3 days later, the storm began. It started with silence. Emails from her publisher went unanswered. Her editor canceled their weekly call. When she arrived at the office of her literary agency, conversation stopped mid-sentence. By noon, she knew why. Her assistant, pale and trembling, handed her a printed page from an online forum. Best-selling author hides funds during divorce, millions unaccounted for. Julia's name was not written, but it did not need to be. The article described her exactly: her age, her books, her city. The comments were worse. She probably did it. People like her always hide something. Entitled and greedy. Classic story. Julia stared at the screen until the words blurred. "He is trying to erase me," she said, her voice hollow. That evening, she met Elena in her office downtown. The city outside was dark, the rain against the windows blurring the lights into gold and gray streaks. Elena listened without interrupting. When Julia finished, Elena leaned forward, her voice low and firm. "He is weaponizing lies, so we will arm you with truth." Julia managed a small, broken laugh. "That sounds like something from one of my novels." Elena's eyes softened. "Then let us make sure it ends like one, with the truth winning." But the attacks did not stop. A day later, Julia received a call from her publishing house. Her newest contract, a 3-book deal, was being paused for review. She understood what that meant. Frozen, indefinite. An hour after that, her phone rang again. The number was her mother's. "Sweetheart," her mother's voice trembled on the line. "I saw something online about company money. Tell me it is not true." Julia closed her eyes. "It is not true," she whispered. "But I cannot stop them from saying it." "Then fight it," her mother said. "Do not let him take who you are." The call ended, but her mother's words stayed. That night, Julia sat alone in her study, surrounded by stacks of her own novels, stories of women who faced betrayal and rebuilt themselves. She had written those words once as fiction. Now, they felt like instruction. She whispered into the stillness, "It is not about money anymore. It is about my name." The following nights blurred into one long stretch of effort. Julia and Elena worked side by side, the glow of laptops cutting through the darkness. They combed through documents, traced signatures, and cross-checked accounts. At times, Julia's eyes stung with exhaustion, but she refused to stop. Each line she read felt like reclaiming another inch of her own life. Through the long hours, Elena's voice remained steady. "He wants you exhausted. That is how he wins, so we stay standing." Julia nodded. "I am still standing." The first real break came one night close to midnight. Elena's phone rang. She answered, listening in silence. Her expression changed, the sharp focus of someone hearing both danger and opportunity. When she hung up, she looked at Julia. "We found something," she said. Julia's pulse quickened. "What is it?" "It is from Victor Lane's records," Elena said. "He was the one sending those messages to David. The same number. There are transactions, false documents, even forged signatures, some pretending to be yours." Julia's heart pounded. "Can this clear me?" Elena hesitated. "It could save you, or destroy you. If it is real evidence, we can prove everything. But if it is a trap, if any part of it is falsified, it will look like you tried to cover your own crime." Julia stood and walked to the window. Outside, rain ran down the glass like veins of silver. Her reflection looked back at her, tired, pale, unyielding. "Then let it come," she whispered. Elena said nothing. She only watched her friend standing in the dim light, shoulders straight, eyes fixed on the storm beyond the glass. A woman no longer running, no longer afraid, because sometimes, to end the war, you have to step into it. Morning rose gray over Boston, the kind of morning that carried no warmth, only resolve. Julia stood by the window of her apartment, the skyline still softened by mist. She could see her reflection in the glass pale, calm, and unyielding. For the first time in months, her heartbeat did not feel like fear. It felt like purpose. "Today," she whispered to her reflection, "I am not fighting him. I am fighting silence." She smoothed the sleeve of her navy suit, fastened the small gold pin her mother had given her, and turned toward the door. Every sound, the closing of her handbag, the click of her heels against the hardwood echoed with finality. Outside, the city was waking. People hurried through the cold, their coats pulled tight, unaware that inside the courthouse a different kind of storm was about to break. The courtroom smelled faintly of paper and polish, a mixture of order and tension. Julia sat beside Elena at the defense table. Across from them, David leaned back in his chair, his posture too relaxed, his expression confident. He had always been good at performance. When the judge entered, the air shifted. Everything that mattered now would be spoken within these walls. The opposing counsel began first sharp, rehearsed, mechanical. He spoke of suspicious transactions, of unauthorized transfers, of malicious concealment. His words were cold instruments, meant to carve away Julia's credibility. Each accusation struck her like a quiet blow. Yet she did not look away. When her turn came, Elena stood, calm and clear. "Your Honor," she said, "the plaintiff accuses my client of theft, but every claim rests on forged evidence, fabricated documents, and a web of deceit designed to mask his own intent." She moved to the center of the courtroom, her voice gathering strength. He tried to paint her as a thief, but every stroke was a lie. Elena placed a folder on the bench and opened it. Inside were copies of emails, dated transactions, and digital records traced back to one name, Victor Lane. As the evidence was read aloud, the courtroom murmured. David's confidence began to fracture. His jaw tightened. His hands, once folded neatly, pressed hard against the table. Then came the revelation. Mr. Lane, Elena continued, was subpoenaed to appear before this court. He failed to do so. She paused, letting the silence fall heavy, because he knows that testifying would expose him to federal charges of fraud and conspiracy. The judge's eyes narrowed. "Is there proof of this?" "Yes, Your Honor," Elena said. "There is proof in the form of recorded communications between Mr. Lane and the plaintiff discussing a plan to manipulate joint accounts for personal gain." David shifted in his seat. For the first time, he looked at Julia, not with arrogance, but with something close to panic. Elena placed one final document on the table. "This," she said, "is the original authorization code for the transfers. It was issued from Mr. Henderson's personal device." Silence. The judge reviewed the papers. The room seemed to contract around the sound of turning pages. Then the gavel came down softly, but its echo was thunder. "Case dismissed," the judge said. "All claims against Julia Henderson are unfounded. The court orders the plaintiff to pay all legal fees incurred." The words rang like a verdict from heaven. Julia's chest rose, then fell. She did not smile. She only closed her eyes and let the weight lift. For months she had lived beneath accusation, betrayal, and fear. Now there was space to breathe again. David stood slowly, as if he no longer recognized the ground beneath his feet. The mask of control had slipped completely. He looked smaller, his shoulders bent inward. Outside the courtroom, the air felt different, lighter, though the clouds still hung low. Julia walked toward the exit, her steps steady. She could feel him following. "Julia," David called. She stopped in the hallway, turning to face him. The light from the tall windows fell across the marble floor between them. "You did not have to do this," he said. His voice was soft again, almost pleading. "You did not have to destroy everything." Julia's gaze met his. "No, David," she said quietly. "You did." He blinked as if the words had struck him harder than any verdict. For a moment he opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Then he turned and walked away. Julia stood alone in the wide corridor, her reflection stretching across the polished stone. Around her, the courthouse hummed with distant footsteps and whispers. She exhaled, a sound that carried both release and exhaustion. For the first time in a long time, she felt peace. Not joy, not triumph, just peace, the kind that comes when the storm has finally spent itself. That afternoon, she walked through Central Park. The trees were bare, the ground scattered with gold and copper leaves. The wind was crisp but gentle, brushing her hair across her face. Children's laughter echoed faintly from the distance. Life, she thought, had continued even when she had almost stopped believing in it. She sat on a bench overlooking the small pond, her hands folded in her lap. The city shimmered on the horizon, reflected in still water. Victory does not always feel like joy, she thought. Sometimes it is simply the absence of fear. Weeks later, in the quiet of her study, Julia opened a new document on her computer. The cursor blinked against a blank page. She began to type the title, The Sky After the Storm. The memoir she had once feared she would never finish now waited to be born from truth, not illusion. Her fingers hovered over the keys as she searched for the first sentence. Outside her window, dusk had softened the city into amber and blue. Somewhere below, the city lights flickered to life, small constellations of survival. She began to write. I once believed safety was something another person could give you. But the truth is, safety lies in the decisions we make when no one else stands beside us. Her words flowed, quiet but steady, like a tide returning after retreat. She paused only once to look up at the open sky beyond her window. Clouds drifted apart, revealing a stretch of pale gold light. Her voice, low and certain, filled the room. Trust is a gift. Control is a right. And when they try to break you, stand then own the sky. The sound of her typing resumed, soft and rhythmic, like rain easing after a storm. And for the first time in many months, Julia smiled. Sometimes life breaks not with thunder, but with a whisper behind a door. For Julia Henderson, it was the sound of a voice she thought she knew. And in that instant, the world she had built on trust began to tremble. But here is the truth most of us spend years avoiding. Trust on its own is fragile. It is not meant to be a blindfold. It is meant to be a bridge, and bridges, if left unguarded, can crumble under the quiet weight of deceit. Julia's story was never just about betrayal or money. It was about awakening, about a woman who stood at the edge of her own collapse and chose not to fall, but to rebuild. She learned that survival does not always look like victory. Sometimes it looks like paperwork signed with trembling hands, like sleepless nights spent tracing the truth, like breathing through fear until courage has time to catch up. There is a particular kind of strength that only comes after losing everything you thought would last. It is not loud. It does not roar. It moves in silence, in the steady heartbeat of a woman who refuses to let someone else write her ending. Julia found that strength not in revenge, but in reclamation. She did not destroy him. She simply reclaimed herself. And perhaps that is the quiet miracle of it all. When the storm passes, what remains is not who hurt you, but who you became because of it. Maybe you, too, have faced a moment like that. A moment when trust cracked, when love turned to uncertainty, when silence felt heavier than truth. If you have, then let this story remind you of something simple and powerful. You are allowed to protect what is yours, your heart, your dignity, your peace, because in the end, life does not reward those who hide their pain. It rewards those who rise from it. So when you find yourself standing in the ruins of what once was, remember Julia's lesson. The storm is never the end. It is the beginning of the sky. And if this story touched something in you, if you saw even a shadow of your own strength reflected in hers, share it. Leave your thoughts below. Your story, your voice, your storm. Together, we remind the world that resilience is not rare, and healing is not solitary. And maybe, just maybe, subscribe. Not just to this channel, but to the idea that no matter what breaks, you can always learn to own the sky again.